Being that writing is one of my favorite hobbies, I also read a lot of books. Horror is one of my favorite genres, and I always wondered, why does Stephen King choose Maine as his setting in a lot of his books? A lot of people say that Alaska is the last frontier, but I think it should be Maine. 88.8% of the state is still forest. Not only that, but apparently Maine has some of the most hauntings in the whole lower 48 as well. With so much undiscovered land, I bet the trees have so many stories to tell over the years. So let's explore some of Maine's history together. Today I have 2 stories to share with you all. It is February 1791. The cabin up the street always had traffic, people coming and going. After all, fur trading happened there. I mean, it's February, the peak of winter, and you need furs to keep you and your family warm. It's 10 o'clock in the morning. Shouldn't the trader be open for business? Or did he already leave headed for the trading post? Slowly, you make your way up. As you make your way closer, you see flies and other strange bugs. Then you notice the smell. You start to get nervous and sweat a little. You recognize that smell. You know in your heart what that means. As a matter of fact, you remember the trader's nephew saying there was a grudge against him by the Native Americans. You fear for the worst, but you slowly open the door anyways. And there he is. Joseph Murray Jr. was dead. 2 gunshot wounds to the head. Who would murder a fur trader and why? Was it for theft? Nah, while fur trading was huge economically for the majority of traders, they were still quite poor, overworked, and underpaid. As a matter of fact, most fur traders left the trade by the time they were 40 years old. So if it wasn't for money, then what about that nephew of his? After all, he could have inherited his uncle's money and business. But after being put on trial, the nephew was acquitted. So then who exactly did it? As it turns out, Joseph was a little more than just a simple fur trader in Maine. For starters, Joseph Jr. was actually born Lanier. He was from France. Not much is known about his family, but it is assumed that his sister may have been married into the French noble family. The records aren't quite clear why he moved from France to America in the first place. Some people say that maybe it was because he served as a colonel in the army, but due to his non-honorable actions, it seemed like he was just a young man looking for a quick come up using the war as a shield, getting involved in business he shouldn't have done. When Lunier set up his base of operations north of a Native American village, he started trouble with the locals, trying to get them to turn against the Americans. Keep in mind, all of his actions were taking place around the Revolutionary War of America versus the British. As the war continued, Lunier as a threat began to magnify. In fact, during the summer of 1777, there was a rumor about Lunier. He was going to plan an attack using the Penobscot River as a method of transportation. Of course, this sent the town into full-on panic mode. Many left and fled, while others prepared for the worst. But, come out eventually, there was no attack. This, of course, made the locals very angry, and they even assumed the false alarm was made to take advantage of the fear of the people and loot their houses. Needless to say, it was the start of Lunier and his manipulative ways. Lunier was no doubt known for causing panic using his manipulative ways and his sneakiness and cunningness. A scouting party under Lunier had captured Lieutenant Colonel and a French officer, along with 4 Native Americans. The Lieutenant Colonel was assumed to be a spy and ended up serving 3 years in jail. After the Massachusetts naval defeat of 1779, the Native Americans turned on the settlers and plundered their houses. Lunier assisted in this, and thus the British loyalists who now also vented their anger to the locals. A lot of houses were burned and looted. Besides manipulating the locals to fight with each other, Lunier also carried messages for the British. In 1782, he reported to Quebec regarding the affairs on the Maine coast. The next year, he was sent southward to learn more information about how the war was doing. He finally learned that there was a sign of possible peace. After the war, that's when he changed his name from Lunier to Joseph. He settled in Castine for a while, at least long enough to be on the Castine census. But then he and his nephew, who just joined him, relocated to an area now known as modern Bangor. He ran a pretty successful trading post. He didn't ask for money, instead he would barter for goods with his furs. Joseph was only 32 years old when he was murdered. It most likely happened when he was asleep. Immediately, his nephew was arrested, even though he claimed that 3 Indians did it. The nephew's defense team managed to put up a good defense, and after he won his defense, he fled. Some said he went back to France. Others said that he went to Haiti and passed away at the age of 21. So if it wasn't the nephew, could it have possibly been the Native Americans? As you can see in this story, Joseph had made a lot of enemies. The Native Americans would have been a good choice. After all, they disliked his exchange rate. And let's not forget about him messing around during the war. He almost caused Colonial Eddie to lose the war for tipping off the British. Another man named Jonathan Louder was captured by him and held prisoner for 3 years because he was assumed to be a spy. Louder also had a family, and his family was threatened multiple times because of this as well. But with extensive searching, none of the people investigating his case found any evidence that suggested Native Americans had anything to do with this murder. With his nephew released and no other evidence being found, the very first murder and longest cold case of Bangor, Maine was never solved. Stephen Marshall did a road trip to go see his dad up in Maine. However, the road trip took a really big toll on his current car, so he decided to bother his father's truck instead once he finally got to the location. It seems he didn't stay for that long, and his dad wondered why he went all the way up here just to turn back around. What his father failed to notice, however, is that his .45 handgun was missing. Armed with his laptop, Stephen Marshall opened it up and began to look at the nearest list of sex offenders. He had looked up 29 of them. He shot and killed William Elliott of Cornerneth, Maine, and Joseph Gary of Milo, Maine. He was on a bus heading out of Maine when the police caught up to him and tried to arrest him. Instead, Stephen took his own life. Even to this day, nobody knows why Stephen did what he did. Although in interviews with his parents, they said he recently became a Christian and said that pedophiles are the scum of the earth. This case, of course, led to debate whether the sex offender registry should be openly available to the public like that. And of course, I say it damn well should be open. These type of crimes are the worst of the worst. But what do you guys think about this situation? I'm not quite sure what to make of this one, or what made him become a Christian and decide to hunt down sex offenders.